Hi, Matt. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, you sound really good. So you'll be presenting today?
No, Chelsea will.
Oh, Chelsea? Okay, perfect. Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks for coming.
Yeah, of course.
Let's see here. Hey, morning, Patrick.
Morning, how you doing, Hal?
Yeah, I'm doing fine. Just juggling some plates. Hazard Mitigation Conference, hosting another meeting.
We all know the feeling.
I know. Gotcha. Well, thanks for coming.
Well, thank y'all for doing them.
Our pleasure. Morning, Debbie. We'll get started here, folks. Thank everybody in about 2 minutes. Good morning, Chelsea.
Good morning, Hal. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I appreciate you presenting today.
Absolutely. Happy to do it. Can y'all see my screen?
Yes, great.
Wonderful.
Okay, just a minute, we'll get started. Okay, let's wait for some folks to come into the meeting. Okay, I think we'll get started. It's 10 o'clock. And welcome everybody to our session 3 of Stumbling Blocks presented by our great team, Whit O'Brien's. Morgan will be, Morganti, Chelsea Morganti will be presenting today for us. Really appreciate that. And welcome to all the folks that are new to our sessions, and welcome to the ones that are coming back for some more great information on hazard mitigation. So at this time, and my name is Hal O'Brien. I am the hazard mitigation specialist for Nevada Emergency Management and Homeland Security. And I will toss the baton over to Chelsea to begin the program. Thank you, Chelsea.
Thank you, Hal. Great. So today is the session 3 of our training sessions here. We're going to go over a couple of stumbling blocks, and I'm fair warning, we're going to have a little bit of math in the middle of this, just to kind of help you all get along when we're doing the budgeting portion of your hazard mitigation applications. All right, let's get into it. Just as like another quick introduction, we do have our Witt O'Brien's team here to provide support. My name is Chelsea Morganti. I'm the Director of Hazard Mitigation at Witt O'Brien's, and I am your host for today's festivities. Again, we're going to cover a couple of the stumbling blocks that have impacted some of our communities that we've seen, and also some things that we know that can be a little bit of a tripping hazard as we move down the application pipeline. So first, we're going to go over the local hazard mitigation planning process and why it's important. We're going to talk about some of the frequently missed eligible costs. We're going to talk about how to meet your match and where you can find those match sources. So first, a local hazard mitigation plan. Why? Why do we do this? What is it? So the local mitigation planning policy guide, which is pictured here, says that the local hazard mitigation plan forms the foundation of a community's long-term strategy to reduce disaster losses and break the cycle of disaster damage, reconstruction, and repetitive damage. So it is a FEMA required document that outlines the specific pieces that need to be included in the hazard mitigation plan. It is a pretty definitive outline document with specific pieces. And why should you care about this FEMA required document? Because if you want to apply for FEMA funding, your entity must be covered by a FEMA approved hazard mitigation plan. So what is this hazard mitigation plan and what goes into it? First, you have to describe your community. Who lives here and where is here anyway? So those are the first couple of pieces that go into the hazard mitigation plan. You have to define your community. Then you have to say what happens here. What are your hazards? What hazards can impact your area? Where exactly are those hazards? How much impact do they have? Basically, like what's at risk. And when you're describing what's at risk, you have to figure out what your important stuff is to be at risk and where is it. So you'll see a lot of hazard mapping. There are some hazards that can go anywhere, like thunderstorm, and some hazards that have a definitive boundary, like floodplain, your flood hazards. So you will map your assets, your important stuff, in relation to those hazards and where they can occur. You also describe what capabilities you currently have, what makes you strong now, and what you feel like is a benefit to your entity in the face of natural hazards. And then once you compare where you are, what you have, and what could happen, you do a risk assessment to see how bad could it get and what could you lose? What are the impacts from those hazards? One of the last couple of steps, really the whole reason why we're doing this, is to develop a mitigation strategy. So now we know how bad it could get. What do you want to do so it doesn't get so bad in the future? What do I want for my community? What are we going to do about it? And how are we going to get there? And these mitigation actions, those definitive stepping stones that help your community down the path towards your goals, are what is going to come out when you do your application development. Those are your projects. Those are the specific things you want to accomplish as a community and what you want money for to get it done. Finally, the last piece of that hazard mitigation planning process is how you're going to keep the document alive, how you're going to integrate it, who's going to be responsible for that, and just making sure that plan doesn't just sit on a shelf as it may have done in the past, and what you want it to do moving forward. The hazard mitigation planning process was revised in 2023. There's new guidance. And one of these revisions is to include new participants. So for many communities here, if you are a representative of a county, you may be used to just having sort of your tried and true standard participants coming to your hazard mitigation planning process. If you have not updated since April 2023, you may not have seen this new element A2A requirement. These first three pieces here are fairly standard. These are the kinds of communities that and representatives that may have been invited in the past. But you cannot forget now that in order to be compliant with the new guidance, your plan must also invite these other two elements down here below, particularly these private organizations and your community-based organizations, nonprofit organizations. This is also a great opportunity when you are developing your actions and figuring out what you want to do to make friends with other representatives in your communities, maybe your water authorities, maybe your fire districts, other kinds of entities in your area that might have goals that align to help and figure out if you guys can leverage what you want to accomplish with what capabilities exist in your community to help get those goals met. So if you were to want to participate in your hazard mitigation plan, what do you need to do? Step one, make friends with your local county emergency manager. At this time, the state of Nevada supports whole county hazard mitigation plans. And so if you would like to be a participant in your hazard mitigation plan, if you would like to apply for project funding later down the road, make sure you're communicating with your county emergency manager and making sure your entity is a recognized participant in the plan from the beginning. That's step one. What are you signing up for exactly when you decide that you want to participate? You need to attend the meetings, so show up for class. You need to provide data and review draft sections, identify assets, infrastructure, and at-risk communities, identify existing capabilities and gaps, do your homework. Of all of these things, you've got to provide input, and you've got to receive information. Come up with mitigation actions. You want to make sure that whatever you want to do, all the projects, all the money that you'd like to spend over the next 5 years is reflected in those actions, and break your disaster cycle. So we're all here because we want a better future for our communities. That's why we do mitigation. It's because we want to avoid those big bad days and save and preserve our communities for the future. So this is sort of like the stick. This is the homework. This is the boring class you have to take in order to get that fun, cool project money to implement your actions. So that's the first stumbling block. If you are a county representative, if you're used to doing a hazard mitigation plan, please consider what other entities in your area might want to participate as well. So you're bringing everybody to the table. That way everybody can be eligible for that project funding down the road. All right, next topic. We're going to talk about missed eligible costs. It's going to go pretty quick. These are just some of the most recently skipped over pots of money that you could be missing out on. The first one is pre-award costs. FEMA has made a lot of steps over the last few years in recognizing the administrative burden of completing these projects and mitigation funding in general. So pre-award costs is one of those things that you have to do in order to apply for the grants. You got to put together the application. You got to sit through these kinds of training sessions. There's a lot of work that goes into getting ready to get the money. If you track those expenses, both your staff time and the cost to complete some of these FEMA checkboxes, like the benefit cost analysis, the environmental historic preservation, if you have any design specifications or opinion of probable costs, if you have any of those costs up front, keep track of them, because you can include them in the overall project cost and either get credit on your match or ask for reimbursement down the road. So don't forget, if you're applying for project funding, start tracking that paperwork now. FEMA loves the paperwork. Related to pre-award costs, but something that goes throughout the project lifecycle, is this concept of subrecipient management costs. And we're going to talk about this a lot as we move through the rest of this slide deck. So if you're kind of fuzzy on how much money that is or whatever, we're going to talk about how you calculate your subrecipient management costs. But again, it's FEMA recognizing that there is a cost associated with applying and managing these subgrants. There's a lot of paperwork involved. There's a lot of staff work involved, or maybe you might need a contractor. You might need to hire somebody to help you with all of this work. But it's once you get like your full total project cost, and again, we're going to cover this in just a minute, it's 5% extra free federal dollars on top to help with doing the homework. What does that mean, subrecipient management costs? This is a long list here, but we wanted to sort of highlight some of those things. That what do we mean when we say doing FEMA's homework? So there is, again, that pre-award, which can be included as part of your subrecipient management cost if that's what you want to do. There are going to be mandatory quarterly reports and financially reporting. There's state or federal site visits, meetings to make sure everybody's on the same page. Any of the compliance activities associated with federal procurement, documentation that supports your quarterly progress reports or closeout. That's a big process too at the very end. You can't forget all the paperwork that you have to turn at the very end of your project. There is invoicing and reimbursement requests and record retention requirements, all of these things. So down this list, I'm throwing it up here so that you can come back to it later and look through it again. We want to make sure that you don't miss out on any of the free money that FEMA can offer you to help you manage the subgrant. Any questions so far on planning or these two cost opportunities? Okay. Bear in mind, if you want to raise your hand at any moment and interrupt me, I do not mind being interrupted. So I'm going to go into meeting the match and calculating your split, your 75%, 25%, and in some cases higher, 90% federal share, 100% federal share in some very specific circumstances. If you are preparing an application or interested in that, we can, do a technical assistance call and talk through where those additional federal share percentage splits might come into play. We're going to talk about how to package up your total project costs and how to calculate how much you are going to have to pay in order to get your subgrant funded. Okay, so calculating the non-federal share. In general, HMA may be used to pay up to 75%. I'm doing a little pie chart. This is a hint for what's coming. 75% of the eligible activity costs. Everything inside of your total project, your scope of work, needs to be eligible under the hazard mitigation assistance guidance. So we've talked about this before. The HMA guidance is going to show exactly what needs to be in that full sphere. And so FEMA will cover 75% of that total project cost. For HMGP post-fire, brick, etc., most of the time, you got your 75-25, and then on top of that, it's 100% federal share for subrecipient management costs. These are the things that are outside of that bubble. These are the two exclusions that we talked about under brick. There is this opportunity for an increased federal cost share, and for FMA, there's an increased federal cost share. If you remember back to the very first training session, these are the two annual grant programs. We have not yet seen the notice of funding opportunity come out yet, so it's on the horizon. We're getting ourselves ready for those two grant programs to open up. But these are the two circumstances where that split of your total project cost is a little bit different if you meet the requirements. Okay, calculating the non-federal share. So again, you've got your full world, your entire scope of work. In some circumstances, you may believe that that just equals that engineer report, that opinion of probable cost. How much is it going to take to do the construction on this particular project? But you cannot forget that inside of this sphere of your total project cost, you also need to include any kind of oversight, construction or project management oversight that you need to complete your project, and your staff time, and any studies that FEMA requires, your hydrological and hydrologic H&H analysis, your environmental assessment, your BCA, anything like that you need to complete as part of the interior of your project, any compliance that are required, public comment periods, public hearings, any meeting spaces that you need to have, if you have any EHP concerns, archaeological or biological monitors, any permits, federal, state, and local permitting that is required to complete this project, any other nuances, land acquisition, public outreach coordinator, any other costs that are associated with the completion of that scope of work. And then don't forget the extra time that you're going to need to do that management of the cost. So when you're figuring out what that whole scope of work looks like, you cannot forget any of these little pieces. And the reason why I say don't forget it is because you want that picture to cover everything that you're going to have to do. You want everything that you're going to need to do the subgrant inside that pie, so you get credit for it. You get 75% off of how much work you're going to have to do. We don't want to leave anything outside the budget because then you're going to have to do it anyway, and it's going to be at an additional cost. So what does this look like in actuality? These are just completely made up numbers that I've put in here to sort of show you how you can get there. When you put in all of your pieces of what you're going to need to include, you come together at a total project cost. And this is that total project cost. I've made it so you can kind of see the 75-25 split. When you do that, when you put everything into your big circle, that 25% can come out of wherever. So if you're meeting with cash, it does not matter. Basically, these are reimbursement grants. So you pay the money for your total project cost, and then FEMA will give you back 75%. So if it's all cash, it doesn't really matter which portion of that cash you're identifying as your match. It's all eligible. It's all inside that eligible scope of work. But if you're meeting with staff time, then you need to calculate that and understand how much portion that's going to be and know that that's not going to be reimbursed, but it could be. That's where I'm trying to say is it doesn't really matter what you identify as that 25%. It just has to be 25% of the whole. So you could, with this kind of a budget, with all of these numbers put together here, match with cash and get your staff time reimbursed, eligible. You could match, you put all of these other little slices, the public meeting space, the permits, construction oversight, all of those other little tiny pieces there could come up to be your 25% match. And then you get federal reimbursement all on the construction cost, that opinion of probable cost. So make sure that you've got your full scope of work organized, and then you can calculate that 25% match off the top. So how do you do that? What does that look like? Again, you want to get that full total number. I am horrible at doing math in my head, so I always have to get a little calculator. But let's just say your budget is, I'm going to do it here. Can you guys see my calculator? We're gonna use a completely made up number. 2,100,000, let's just put some numbers in here. Okay, let's just say that once you add up all of your pieces, this is your total project cost. There are some very easy cheat ways that I use to figure out what my federal share and my non-federal share is. A little cheat here that I like to use, I do not want to put pennies in my budget because FEMA loves to count pennies and it will be more of a headache than you really want to deal with. So I leave pennies out if I can. But let's just say this is your total project cost. We're going to divide it by 100% to get what that 1% is. And then we're going to multiply that by 75. That is your federal share. I'm going to write this down so when we do it the next way, I can recreate this so we can 974. Okay, well, I guess it doesn't really matter. So that's one way. You take your total project cost, you divide it by 100%, multiply it by 75%, and then you get your non-federal share. What I like to do at that point is take my total project cost, subtract the federal share, and make sure that the math works on the match side. Let's do a different one. Let's say your total project cost is $547,000 flat. Another way to do that is to divide it by 4, like $1.04. That gives you your 25%. So each of those 4 quarters is a quarter. And then if you have 3 quarters, that's your federal share. So 410,000 for the federal share, and that 136,750 for your non-federal share. So those are 2 like easy cheat ways to calculate what is your 75%, 25% of your total project cost. And then, like I mentioned, once you get that, once you figure out what your dollar is, once you figure out if your total project 100% is, outside of that is that 5% subrecipient management cost. This is where you get your, and this sort of graphic is from the HMA guidance. So if you're going to look at it, you're going to see there is a 10% share that goes to the state for the management of the grant, and then 5% that gets passed through. So don't get too confused by this one. Just see here, what it's trying to show you is that for your particular subgrant, you get, your total project cost, and then an additional little sliver of that 5% federal share, which is not nothing. Even if you're doing a smaller subgrant, that 5% can be a couple thousand, and that's not nothing when you're trying to pay for staff or something else along those lines. Total project cost is that 100%, 5% on the outside. Any questions about calculating the match before we move on to what makes up that match? Does anybody want to run any numbers and do cross-check on this? Okay, so everybody else here is great at math, I see. All right, let's talk about how to meet that match then, some match sources. I like to be a little bit less formal, and so this is some less formal language to help describe all of the different ways that you can meet your match. Now remember, everything inside of that total project cost, everything inside of your scope of work needs to be eligible under the HMA, and it does not matter if it is match or federal share, it's all eligible. So you can include in that total project cost whatever that 25% that you want to foot the bill for, and you can make that cash, you can make that staff time, you can meet it with your stuff, you can meet it with volunteer labor, your community participation, you can meet it, you can meet it with other entities that have a stake in the project, donations and sponsorships and things like that. You can meet it with program income, money generated by the project. You can meet it with federal funds that lose their federal identity. So this is a very important component as well, understanding that there is a concept called duplication of programs or duplication of benefits. And that is where you cannot use other federal dollars and double dip. You can't use federal funds to match other federal funds. So there are, in very specific cases where there are some exceptions, but the general rule of thumb is you cannot match federal dollars with federal dollars. And I'll get into that a little bit more as well. Okay, does anybody, out of curiosity, because when I've done this slide in the past, can I get a quick show of hands, or maybe if somebody wants to come off of mute, is anyone interested in the description of any of these particular options? You'd like to learn more or like to prioritize one or the other? Does anybody have any interest in one of these? Somebody want to come off mute and let us know? Okay, well then I'm just going to go through them one after another. And if anybody wants to speak up and have a question or something, please do. All right. So cash. What are the advantages of using your own cash? It's ready to use, it's easy to track, it's flexible. Basically, you track everything, every cost that's associated with the project, you submit the reimbursement request to FEMA, 75-25, you get 75 back on the dollar. It's fairly easy. However, it does require you to have a lot of cash. It requires you to have that ability to pay it out and get it back later. A highlight that I want to make sure everybody is aware is that these are reimbursement grants. So in order for you to be able to get your money back, that 75 cents, you have to first pay the amount, prove that you paid the amount, and then submit that documentation to get reimbursed. So there is a burden to that, especially if you're going through construction where you have maybe some big dollar values right when you need them, when you're in the middle of construction. But reimbursement, so good to know. All right, force account labor. So here is a little example down below. This means that you are utilizing your own staff time. If you are partnering with another entity, you can also track the staff time of other counties, cities as well. And you will need to track this data for everybody, basically. Anybody who is contributing their hourly rates, their hourly time, will need to track their documentation. Some entities might have some really sophisticated time tracking devices, and so they're able to keep track in their own internal systems already. If your timesheet system doesn't include that option, Excel is a great viable option as well. So this is why we have this little sample down here at the bottom. The hourly rate that you're tracking. So let's say all of you sitting here on this call today, you're going to track this as professional development, as application development time. So you're going to put in, that Debbie 1 hour on 12/5 application development training, and you're going to track that. The hourly rate that you get paid is not the full amount that it costs for you to sit here on this hour of training. There is a fringe rate. There's an additional cost that your employer would have to pay for your benefits, the insurance, all of those other pieces. And so when you're calculating how much your hour is worth, it's not just your pay rate. It is the cost that it takes, the full, hourly rate plus fringe, the full cost to employ you for that hour. So make sure that when you are tracking your time, you are not just including your take-home rate. It is the full cost in that hourly rate. And then you have to make sure that your time spent, that hour, is eligible and inside of your scope of work. So again, if you're going to be including something like this, the application development, it's called pre-award. And if it's post-award work, then you can include it as subrecipient management costs, or inside, depending on what you're doing. If you're developing that quarterly report, that could be subrecipient management costs. If you're doing a site visit, that might be inside of your scope of work. You just want to track what you're doing and where you're billing it to, and how much time and when and who did it and how much it's going to cost. So all of those pieces of paper need to be assembled in order to track your labor costs. It is very cost effective to do this level of tracking in order to get money back. So basically, your community is going to be paying for your time anyway. Might as well use all of the FEMA cash to reimburse you for the cash that you're spending. And then basically your staff time is what you're contributing on your non-federal share. But there is a paperwork requirement to this, and it does take time. Some people might view this as the money being free, but you will work very hard and spend lots of time doing the documentation to get that quote unquote free money. So if you are interested in matching your subgrant funds with staff time, we definitely suggest, making sure all of your ducks are in a row prior to getting into the subgrant, to make sure your documentation tracking is up to snuff on the back end. That way you don't lose money in case you didn't include your scope of work. You didn't include what you were doing for that hour. And so there's no way to make sure that it's eligible. And so you don't get credit for it. We want to make sure you get credit all the way along. Force account equipment. So let's say you have a really cool project that you want to do. You have all of the capabilities in-house to execute that project, but you need money to actually, do it. Let's say you're going to be doing a roads project, and you have a really capable roads department. And so those, field staff are going to be going out into the field to do that work. Or let's say you're doing a fire mitigation project and your firefighters, your volunteer firefighters are going to get paid to go out and do whatever that mitigation work is. If you're utilizing your staff time, you might also have equipment to do that. So like a backhoe or a chainsaw or an air compressor or some other equipment on hand that you're going to utilize to accomplish whatever that scope of work is. This is a snip of the FEMA schedule of equipment rates. There is an established hourly rate or usage rate for each of the kinds of equipment that you might be utilizing. Normally, if you are an emergency manager, you might see this on the public assistance side, but it's utilized across FEMA. If you have a different schedule of rates, like if you're working with the U.S. Forest Service, you might want to compare the two and see if there's a benefit to using one over the other. My understanding is that FEMA's rates might be a little bit better. But basically, if you want to get credit for utilizing your own stuff, FEMA will count that as part of it. So if you're utilizing your own staff and your own equipment, you will get, again, if that's part of your total project cost, 75 cents on the dollar reimbursed to utilize your own stuff or to get counted as match. This is another option. You can use your own stuff to match the grant. Sponsorship, donations, and partnerships. So remember, if you've made friends as part of your hazard mitigation planning process, or if you know of an entity, a private entity, a nonprofit. Let's say there's a really bad flooding situation down your main street, and there are 6 businesses, small businesses that want to, host a meeting in their shop, or they want to give you $1,000, or if Walmart wants to donate something, or if you've got a nonprofit in your area that's really interested and wants to be protected, or whatever. Or your neighboring jurisdiction. Let's say the county has ownership of the road, but the city has the equipment and they want to donate something. If there's a private homeowner who wants to donate a couple $1,000s, or we'll talk about a little bit more about some of the money that homeowners could contribute as well. But your match, that non-federal match, can be met by a variety of non-federal sources, as long as it's not federal dollars, state dollars, local dollars, private dollars, nonprofit dollars, all good. The benefits of these, it's no cost to the community and can be less expensive than contractor services. Some of the nonprofits that I've seen in different spheres are very interested in seeing people working towards their goals. And so sometimes you'll be able to get a nonprofit to donate the time or expertise, and you can count that as part of your match. So if a nonprofit is going to be lending you an engineer for 10 hours to give you like technical assistance, they can mock up like a little, this is what it would cost for 10 hours of time from our engineer. And you can count that donation of time as part of your match. It requires the same amount of documentation that we've talked about before. Again, FEMA loves their paperwork. So you want to make sure that you're documenting the cost of what that donation is. If it's a dollar figure, or if it's somebody's time, you want to make sure that you're documenting that it's an eligible cost, basically that what that engineer was doing or what that community space was for, and that it fits inside of the scope of work. I like to say that the hazard mitigation plan is a great opportunity to make those friends, because if you know from the beginning, before you even go into your project application, that you have some buddies that want to support you on this application process, you can from the very beginning make sure that they're included in that scope of work. Okay, let's talk about volunteer labor. Did you know that just anybody off the street who wants to come to your community meeting for an hour, you can charge essentially a $29.76 for them to participate in your process here. What I mean by that is, let's say you are having a community meeting to select which one of these 3 mitigation ideas is the best one. Which of your 3 ideas does the community support? Which is not nothing. Many times we may think we know what the community wants or needs or what they would prioritize, but until you actually ask the question, you're not really sure. And if you're going after FEMA brick money or FMA, having community support and documenting that community support gives you extra points and makes you more likely to be selected. So let's say you've done your due diligence, you're presenting to the community your 3 options for mitigation, and you're going to hold a meeting to go through them all. Every single person who walks through that door, let's just say you've got 100 people that come to your 1-hour meeting, as long as they sign up on a sheet, so basically you'll have a sign-in sheet, you now have $29.76 per name, 76 cents per name of people who come to that meeting, which you can just count as that free money. So that's almost $300 off of your match just because people came to your meeting. It can be a virtual sign-in. It can be an in-person sign-in. We've also had circumstances where the homeowners were actually doing some of the work. There's an example about basically a community, a homeowners association wanted to get wildfire mitigation work done. And so the county reps rolled up, they handed out the equipment, which they got to track for how much utilization of those equipment pieces. And then for every hour that the volunteers spent doing the thinning of the, the vegetation, $29. Check, 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 check. So don't underestimate the value of community participation. One note here, though, is if you are a county employee, let's say you're a county employee and this is a county subgrant agreement, you have to use the actual fringe rate, not the volunteer rate. And if there is a partner that's like from a city, hypothetically, that city would be utilizing their fringe rate for that staff person, not the volunteer rate. There's been a couple of circumstances where the volunteer rate is slightly higher than that staff person's salary, unfortunately, but you need to use the one that is most applicable to that entity. So if it's a representative from the state, if it's a representative from neighboring jurisdiction or from your own jurisdiction, you got to use your own salary rate. Program income. This is not going to be valid for every single project. But if you're curious about it, we've got here just like a very quick little what it is and what it isn't. The circumstances where I've seen program income come into play, again, has been mostly on like wildfire mitigation, where hypothetically, let's say you've just downed a bunch of canopy trees and you have wood that can be turned into firewood or mulch that can be sold for like gardening mulch. And so you package up either the firewood or the mulch or both, and then sell those or donate those to the community. That program income, the money that you make off of those products, can be counted as match as well. Okay, federal funds that lose their federal identity. Again, in most circumstances, you cannot match FEMA dollars with other federal funds. These are some of the explicitly identified resources that FEMA has said is okay. This first one, is anyone here on the call a certified floodplain manager or operates in a floodplain capacity? Okay. So this one might be a little bit niche or nuanced. Mostly this is going to be in the realm of that floodplain coordinator, your NFIP compliance, National Flood Insurance Program. So basically, increased cost of compliance is when you have damages and you cannot rebuild your home back to where it was before. It has to come into the most recent most applicable NFIP requirements. So it can't just come back to how it was, it has to come back better, increased cost compliance. Some advantages of that is that it is suitable for those residential type projects. It is money that is allocated to the homeowners, but it's a way where the homeowners, if they were never going to get that home elevated or acquired otherwise, could contribute some funding, not out of their own pocket, but through this ICC process to get their home elevated. Again, part of this like disaster, post-disaster realm, This is money that could be awarded that could help be utilized to match. Has anybody had any experience with SBA loans before in the past? I'm going to leave, this information is available to you if it's something that comes up later, but if it's not applicable, I don't want to get too far in the weeds on these kinds of things. It's here. This training session and these slide decks, as my understanding, is going to be available on the state's website. So if it does come up later in the future, you can come back and take a look at how this would maybe impact you. Most of these are going to be the increased cost of compliance and the Small Business Administration. It's mostly going to be around those kind of residential properties and may have some benefit there. This one may be of slightly more interest. So the U.S. Department of Agriculture makes available funding related to water and water availability for rural areas. These funds, there's a variety of different programs, but if your community is rural and looking to do some kind of protection around drought resilience, backup water supply, anything along those lines, there may be an opportunity to pursue both mitigation dollars and a USDA loan. So if your project is related to water, water stability, drinking water, wastewater retrofits, anything along those lines, this might be something you want to look into a little bit further. Housing and Urban Development, CDBG. So this funding source is one of those funds that comes through the state, a state agency, to the city and can be utilized in a variety of different ways. So if you are a CDBG recipient community, one of the things that you're going to have to talk about is if your leadership is in favor of leveraging your CDBG funds for a mitigation activity. There is a coordination piece both with the state agency to make sure that what you're tasking is eligible under HMA, and also that the activity you want to do under the mitigation program is also eligible under CDBG. So there's a little bit extra coordination requirements going on there. And admittedly, the HUD rehab mortgage insurance is sort of the farthest outside of my understanding, but it has been identified by FEMA as one of these eligible non-federal, or so I should say, federal sources that loses their federal identity funds. So I wanted to make it available to you. If this is something that you're familiar with or would like to know more about, obviously something to pursue as well. Okay, that's all of the content that we had today, but I did want to leave a little bit of time because I've talked through some things that can be quite in the weeds. Is there any topic that you all would like me to go back and look at a little bit further? Does anybody have any questions about what we've talked through today? Okay, hearing none. We've got the resources again up here, the local mitigation planning policy guide. If you have questions about the hazard mitigation plan, what you need to do to be participant, and all of the little check boxes you have to tick to make sure that your plan is eligible, that's up here. The state's hazard mitigation plan, if you have questions about what the state has done in this realm as well. The notice of interest, if you're planning to pursue a project application, remember that the application process is open now for the HMGP post-fire. So if you're currently developing a subgrant or thinking about developing a subgrant, make sure you get that your foot in the door. Hazard mitigation cost assistance share guide, that's where some of this information around how to meet your non-federal share is available. And then that program and policy guide, which is where it sets out the full limitations of everything that's eligible under HMA. Please join us next week where we're going to talk through developing your application. So if you have already submitted your notice of interest or you're planning to, next week's session is going to go over some of the checkboxes and documentation requirements that you'll need to provide in order to get across the finish line and get that money. Okay, that's everything that I had today. Unless anybody, I'm going to hang out here for the next couple of minutes if anybody wants to ask any questions or chat about anything that you've got going on. All right, Hal, I'll turn it back to you, I think.
Okay,
Thanks, Chelsea.
sounds good. So thank you all for attending today. It was an excellent presentation, Chelsea, on session 3 on the stumbling blocks. Appreciate that. And also, if anybody needs any support or has any questions, please contact our state hazard mitigation section, myself or Janelle Woodward. We'd be glad to assist you with any information or technical assistance you may need. And also, as I had stated, we have our great team of Widow Bryans also will be assisting with planning and project application, building and hazard mitigation, any type of question you have in regards to that. So if nobody has any questions, once again, thank you all for coming today. And I'll give you a little bit time back for your days, for your day today. And you all take care. Thank you.
Thank you, Hal.
Thank you, Chelsea.